Bienvenidas, bienvenidos todos a este Día Internacional del Tarsero. Feliz Día Internacional del Tarsero. Como ya sabéis, desde la Asociación de Primatología Española hemos organizado este año, para celebrar este día, una videoconferencia sobre la conservación y el estado de los tarseros. Y nada más, vamos a tener una serie de charlas y como ya os hemos comentado a través de las redes sociales, debido al carácter internacional de los conferenciantes, el evento va a ser en inglés. Así que, sin más, esperamos que disfrutéis mucho y pasamos al inglés, que va a ser el idioma durante todo el evento. Welcome everyone. Thanks to be here to join this event. Happy International Tarsier Day. From the Spanish Society of Primatology, we have organized this year, to celebrate the International Tarsier Day, a live video conference with the experts on the tarsiers, conservation and status. And well, we want to celebrate with you and to share and to enjoy this live event for this International Tarsier Day of 2021. Before we start, each speaker will have time for the presentation, and after he finish or she with the presentation, we will have some time to ask questions about the talk that they have given. You can write the questions on the YouTube chat live that we have on our YouTube channel on the right of your screen that you have now. And then after we see the question, we will share, and then the speaker will answer to the questions. So we are going to start with the first speaker. The first speaker is Dr. Myron Shekelle, that is instructor at the biology department in the Western Washington University in the USA. Welcome, Myron. Thanks for being here. He has been studying tarsier for a long time. He started in 1992 studying tarsiers in the Sulawesi Island in Indonesia. And he, with his team, has been studying, taking systematic sampling, using systematic sampling of wild tarsier population for genetic, acoustic, and morphologic data. And then with this data collected, they compared the data with the biogeographic patterns of the Sulawesi Island. Thanks to this technique and this methodology, he named 13 species of tarsiers. So that means that before they start working, there were 3 species of tarsiers, and nowadays there are 16 taxons. And also, he is member of the UICN Red List, and on this organization, he has the responsibility to do the assessments for all the special tarsier species. So that's all. We hope you enjoy the Myron talk, and you can start whenever you can. Thanks, Myron.
Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you for inviting me here. Let me start by saying that several years ago, people who study tarsiers and people who are enthusiastic about tarsiers thought that perhaps it would be a good idea to have an International Tarsier Day, and we batted around a couple of different ideas. And then ultimately, the great weight of opinion was to go with May 4th, because May 4th has slowly also become Star Wars Day. And because of the resemblance between Yoda and tarsiers, we thought that it was a great tie-in. So welcome here to International Tarsier Day, a Tarsier night in Spain, I assume. May the 4th be with you. I'm here to talk to you today about taxonomy, distribution, and conservation status of tarsiers. Today, we classify tarsiers in 3 genera, one for each of 3 biogeographic regions: Sulawesi, Philippines, and Sundaland. They were classified in a single genus not long ago, but my colleague Colin Groves and I split them into 3. The effort to split them, the thought to split them into two, separating the Sulawesi form from the Western and Philippine form, that had been going around for some while. They're really quite different animals. In the wild, Sulawesi tarsiers are social, and they live in small family groups, very much like gibbons, whereas the Sundaland tarsiers and the Philippine tarsiers have a sort of standard nocturnal, solitary, probably solitary but social system. And so what you see typically, or at least what is reported, is typically there are just individuals, or at the most a mother and one infant, whereas the Eastern tarsier social groups can get up to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think the highest recorded ever is 11 individuals. Also, the clade of Western and Philippine tarsiers have the highest diploid number of chromosomes in Mammalia, as far as I know. They have a diploid number of 80, whereas the Sulawesi tarsiers are just 46. They differ quite a bit in terms of how vocal they are. There's morphometric differences that were documented by Niemitz back in the 70s. So that, and it typically is a decline, with the Western being the most extreme, and Sulawesi tarsiers being the least extreme, and Philippine tarsiers being intermediate. Can you hear me okay? I hear that the audio is going poor. What can I do to make the audio any better? Well, so the Western tarsiers will have the longest legs, the longest hands, the biggest. Does that make the audio better? Okay. Let's.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Better. With echoes. Yeah. Let me try something. Okay. Echo's gone? Sound okay? Okay, wonderful. I apologize for that. So let's go back. There are 3 genera, one for each of 3 biogeographic regions: Sulawesi, the Philippines, and Sundaland. Today, we classify them in 3 genera. And whereas you go back 10 years or so, and perhaps they were all in the genus Tarsius. How justified is that? Well, for a long while now, there has been discussion of separating the Western and Philippine Tarsiers. For instance, with the sociality, the Eastern Tarsiers live in gibbon-like small family social groups that can be anywhere from a mated pair with 1 or more offspring. Sometimes there's multiple adult males or multiple adult females. And I think the largest group size ever documented is 11. In the wild, when you encounter Western and Philippine tarsiers, you encounter solo individuals, as far as I've ever found in the records. So they're like a typical nocturnal social, but probably, or solitary, but probably social, where the largest social group that you'll see in the wild is a mother and an infant. They differ greatly in terms of their vocalizations, the Sulawesi tarsiers, just like gibbons, have a duet call. Let's see if it will tolerate the camera to come on. And the chromosome number, the diploid number, is very different. The Philippine and Western tarsiers have a diploid number of 80, which is, I believe, the largest number in Mammalia, whereas the Eastern tarsiers are just 46. And then there's a series of morphological traits that were documented by Niemitz from museum specimens back in the 70s that show the Western tarsiers are the most extreme and the Eastern tarsiers are the least extreme, and the Philippine tarsiers are intermediate in almost every way, so that the Western tarsiers have the longest legs, the longest hands, the biggest eyes, the shortest ears, and so forth. Is the generic separation of Western and Philippine tarsiers justified? It's a good question. It's hard to say whether or not that will be supported into the future, but given the great amount of specific diversity that we found among the genus Tarsius, we thought that it was a good idea to do. Plus, the time separation between Western and Philippine tarsiers is quite deep. It's greater than Homo and Pan, for instance, most likely. Okay. Now, these animals have crossed Wallace's line at least twice. You can see that the Philippine Western Tarsier clade has crossed, as well as the Sulawesi tarsiers. And I put an asterisk there because Stefan Merker and some of the work that he's done with various authors has shown that Sulawesi itself might have been invaded by tarsiers twice, or at least twice. And you can see something of the time depth that we get here between these clades. Now, what's odd is that the Sundaland tarsiers are, their distribution seems to be limited by the Musi River. And so you have an animal that's crossed back and forth across Wallace's line, but can't get across the Musi River. It sounds a little bit unusual. So let's consider that the Eastern tarsiers they're distributed on all of Ice Age Sulawesi, plus many islands that are offshore that were never connected to Sulawesi. The Philippine tarsiers are an absolute perfect fit for the Ice Age landmass of Mindanao. There's nothing more, nothing less. And then the Sundaland tarsiers are this very strange distribution that currently is bounded by the Musi River, and in the Ice Age probably by an Ice Age river called the Sunda River, which would have separated the South Natuna Islands from the North Natuna Islands. If we put in some paleohabitat reconstructions, there's a possibility that there was a band of dry habitat that cut right through Sundaland and Southeast Asia. And if you were to, while we have very little data, if you were to just eyeball this, it looks in any case as though the Sundaland tarsiers might have been restricted to the northern end of that, and then their current distribution would be a very recent range expansion. For instance, why are they in Sumatra but not in Java? Now, once we get into the genera, there's very highly uneven support for the taxonomies. So for the Western tarsiers, there's almost no genetic data at all. And what we have is a very weakly supported taxonomy based on morphology alone, in which the split between Borneo and Sumatra was supported by Niemitz's work in the 70s on museum specimens, but the splits for Saltator on Belitung and Natunensis on the South Natuna island of Sarasan were not supported. But When we sat down to do a taxonomy for primates, coming out of the primate taxonomy for the New Millennium workshop in Orlando, Florida in 2000, it was very clear that the taxonomy of tarsiers was poorly understood. And so rather than synonymize a bunch of names based on a lack of evidence, we took the opposite approach, which was to leave them alone, with the recognition that we just didn't have much evidence at all for Western tarsiers, or at the time for the Philippine tarsiers. Now, since then, for the Philippine tarsiers, there's been one small genetic study based on ad hoc sampling. It sort of weakly supported 3 groups. Initially, it was going to support the taxonomy that we have now, with Bohol being a separate species. Then on a subsequent analysis, the one that ultimately got published, that third taxon shifted a little bit to be Dinagat Island and Northern Mindanao. But still, for this time, the amount of support, it's not been replicated, and the amount of support for it is very poor, particularly relative to Sulawesi, where we have several genetic studies, several bioacoustic studies, and we have what is, for nocturnal primates, a robustly supported taxonomy that not only has strong support between the genetic and the acoustic data, but also fits beautifully with a biogeographic model. So in Sulawesi, we have a reasonable hypothesis for why there are as many tarsiers, and even where to look for the new ones. Now, when it comes to conservation assessments, once again, we have highly uneven evidence. This here is, we did work in 2015 at the IUCN Red List Primate Specialist Group workshop, red listing workshop in Singapore in November of 2015. And these were finally published in 2020. This one here apparently is Indra Yustian and myself. But I must say that that we really haven't updated much of the work that we did before in 2008. And based on this, globally, Cephalopacus canis would be vulnerable, and then individually, the Bornean and Sumatran would also be vulnerable, but Saltator would be endangered, and then Natunensis on the tiny island of Sarasan would be critically endangered. Now, for the Philippine tarsiers, again, we have a weakly supported taxonomy. If we stick with this taxonomy, we get near threatened throughout the range. And one of the things to keep in mind is that the Philippines is an archipelago of rather small islands, and they're very aware that if we were to use very conservative assessment standards, almost many things would be critically endangered. And so my experience in working with the Filipinos has been that they're very aggressive in seeing that it isn't, that the data are not interpreted that way. Okay, so what about Sulawesi then, where we know a little bit more? Globally, again, if it was all still just one lowland species, as it was 30, 40 years ago, they would be vulnerable. But we have begun to identify the individual taxonomic units, the biodiversity, how it is subdivided, how tarsier biodiversity is subdivided in Sulawesi. And we've built it up quite well. We're not quite done, but I think that it will be done very soon, that we'll have a very comprehensive map. You can see that on this map here from 2019, there were some unsurveyed regions, but I think that we'll be able to fill all of that in very soon. And we will ultimately hit the prediction back in 2001 of 16 or more species from this one species group. Just what was Tarsius spectrum in 1980 will be 16 or more, plus Tarsius pumilus up in the montane forests. And when we do it this way, we see Tarsius sanguirensis as endangered, Tarsius pumilus up in the montane forests as endangered, Palangensis endangered, Tarsius tumpara critically endangered, and Tarsius niemitzii in the Togian Islands as endangered. Tarsius lariang currently is still listed as data deficient, but again, if you're in the primate specialist group, or you might have gotten the email that went around a day or two ago to try and remove the DD status by this summer. And I think that we'll be able to do that with lariang, and I think that it will be vulnerable also. What about in situ conservation efforts? Oh, look, dear me, there's a, there's an image that did not show up. It didn't come through. So on the island of Bohol in the Philippines, tarsiers are a tourism mascot. It's like Disneyland with Mickey Mouse. And tarsiers are advertised for almost any tourist attraction. And if you go into almost any store, you'll find tarsier keychains and backpacks and everything that you can imagine. The quality of the tourism historically hasn't been that good. It's sort of been like perhaps in Appalachia in the United States when there were black bears and roadside shows and things like that. Now in Tangkoko in Sulawesi, they have tarsier jungle tours, and it's a little bit better. You're taking people into the forest to see tarsiers that are wild, but let's make no mistake here. This is not guerrilla tracking, and some pointers from places like Rwanda and Uganda could be very helpful, because we have to remember that really not all nature tourism is ecotourism. Ecotourism has a higher standard where it should be sustainable. It should be helping. And in many cases, what you'll find are many, many tourists all gathering around just a few tarsiers. Ah, there's Bohol. It showed up late. I don't know. That must have been some ad that I didn't know. But you can see there that that's a billboard on the side of the road, and they're advertising come to the Chocolate Hills, which are some karst hills there. You'll look at them. They tend to have very little vegetation. They get dry. They turn brown. They call them the Chocolate Hills. They're advertised with a tarsier, just as you would advertise almost anything at Disneyland with Mickey Mouse. Okay, what about ex situ conservation efforts? Well, look, the record of tarsiers in captivity up to 10 or 20 years ago was really just horrible. It was the record of tarsiers in captivity was the record of their extinction in captivity. But really, it's gotten a lot better if you look at tropical Southeast Asia. If you leave tarsiers in outdoor enclosures in Southeast Asia where the climate is right, pardon me, people have done pretty well with them. You get infants, you sometimes get second generation infants, and some of the people are pretty good. This fellow in the middle was a master's student of mine, Alphonsus Hamis. He's just a real tarsier whisperer, if you will. When he went to Ragunan Zoo at the Schmutzer Primate Center there, their 6-month survival rate for nocturnal primates went from 0% to 100% right on his arrival. So it takes some dedicated people. I don't think that it would be that case if I were to do it. But if you found the right people, you can do it. And as you can see, there's a tarsier sitting very tamely on a hand. Sometimes local people will capture tarsiers and just have the skill and tame them. Mostly what happens is people capture tarsiers and they die within 72 hours or so. What about rescue centers? Well, there is this story of the little leucistic tarsier that went around in February 9th, February 10th. Now, this tarsier, the news about this tarsier dropped off the map almost immediately. I don't think anything was published on it, but certainly the stories are around that anybody can track down that this tarsier did not last long. It lasted perhaps about 72 hours, not much more. That's about what we would expect. Now, there is a rescue center in the area, but they have no experience with tarsiers. There are people in the area that have experience with the tarsiers. And so sometimes there's just a mismatch of the resources between the human resources, the physical resources, the monetary resources. Generally speaking, I'm not very much of an advocate for rescue centers. I think that conservation priorities for species that are reproducing okay in the wild, the money is often better spent somewhere else. But with tarsiers, you have this situation where you have no ex situ conservation options at all right now. We have critically endangered taxa, no ex situ options. So I would be in favor of putting the resources together, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. The responsible authorities have to decide that this is something they want, and it has to wind up in the hands of people who have the skill, and it has to be funded. This isn't always the case. Now, tarsiers is flagship and umbrella species. So in Wallacea and in the Philippines, those two hot spots, they really rely on tarsiers as flagships and as umbrellas. Look, in Sulawesi, for conservation, I would love to bring in the best flagship in the world. I would say use the panda, but the problem is there are no pandas there. And we could use a gorilla or a chimpanzee, an orangutan, but there are none there. And so when you take a country that has options like Indonesia, which has elephants and tigers and orangutans, they're a little surprised sometimes that tarsiers might get the job done, but it's quite clear that they can. In the Philippines, on the other hand, where they don't have those taxa, they're quite happy to use tarsiers as flagship species for conservation, in my experience. And so sort of to pull things together here, one of the things that the work on tarsiers, particularly in Sulawesi, that has been very helpful is to identify the little hotspots within the hotspot. Sulawesi is itself a conservation hotspot, a very high conservation priority, but it's obviously there in the whole area. It's the 11th largest island in the world. It's not all equally under threat. And what we can find with tarsiers, which are very diverse, are the hottest hotspots within the hotspot. And then with perhaps nothing better. Look, Annie, you've got another Sulawesi flagship, by all means use it. Babi Rusa works in places. The Malaya works in places. The macaques work. Use them all. But in this situation, the tarsiers work pretty well also. I want to point out that there are several people who couldn't join us today for a variety of reasons. There in the very center, you'll see the famous telephone booth conference that we held in 2005. That's Christine Driller, Sharon Gursky, Stefan Merker, and myself. Christine, I don't know what happened. Sharon couldn't make it. If we look over at the river, at the Lariang River there, one of our colleagues, Echel, one of our friends from Palu, unfortunately passed away 2 years ago and is not with us anymore. In the Philippines, I apologize for not finding one of my photos with Perry Ong, but Perry was a real spearhead for lots of Philippine science and conservation efforts for many years. He also passed away 2 years ago, just within a few weeks of when Echel did. Philippine Tarsier Foundation, a long history there. I didn't hear back from them. Project Tarsius is another one in the Philippines. And I want to point out that Western Washington University has created a fund for my Tarsier project. So you can send tax deductible donations there. And with that, I really want to thank the Spanish Primatology Association and Victor Beltran for sponsoring us here today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Myron. It was amazing, your talk. I hope everyone enjoyed the talk. We are still waiting for questions. So please, the people that is watching us through YouTube, you can write the questions. I will have one question, Myron, about, well, I have two. I'm gonna do first one and wait for someone from the YouTube, but the first is about the rescue centers. Do you think that maybe the fact that to maintain alive the tarsiers in captivity is one of the things that is like main, the most difficult things is to maintain the tarsiers in captivity because of the diet or the behavior patterns? What do you think?
Probably getting the diet and the habitat right are two things that are critically important, so that when locals find them, they often try to feed the tarsiers something that they think that a little primate ought to eat. Like they might give them fruit or they might give them rice, but tarsiers are the only primate that doesn't eat any vegetable matter at all. So it has to be living, live insects or little lizards, things like that. So that's one of it for sure. And then making sure that the habitat is right. Nobody has yet been successful at bringing them indoors and putting them on a controlled climate.
Mm-hmm. And the other question is, do you have data or news about the pet trade on tarsiers? Do you think this is a main threat for them or not?
I think that I have run into information on the pet trade. It's all anecdotal, so I don't actually have data per se. But the first thing with that leucistic tarsier, for instance, that one surely would have been very valuable on the pet trade. So my concern right away was that once that one was advertised, that someone would put in a very high bid for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have one question from the YouTube, and it's about the behavior. Is that how often do they need to eat on the wild, the tarsier?
Well, one of the ecologists would be better suited to answer that than I would, and perhaps they can address that. But what you'll see is that a tarsier that hasn't eaten for half a day or a day still looks pretty good. At 2 days, it's believed that they have a very narrow energy budget. And first, remember that there is no such thing as the tarsier. There are tarsiers. And it's thought that the Western tarsier has a much narrower energy budget, and that in the daytime, it might even go into a torpor and have some brown fat layers that help to bring it back out of that torpor, whereas the Sulawesi tarsiers are not really anything like that. So there's probably variation. But with the Sulawesi tarsiers, if they were to go without eating for 3 days, that's probably the end of it for them.
Okay. Thank you very much. So if we don't have more questions, we will save time also to have at the end of the event more time for the questions once everyone finish. Okay, so we're gonna continue with the next talk. Thank you very much, Myron. See you later. And the next speaker is gonna be Dr. Stefan Merker. He's curator of mammals on the Department of Zoology on the State Museum of Natural History in Stuttgart, Germany. Thank you very much for being here. Welcome, Stefan. He has been working with tarsiers also for a long time. He started in 1998, if I'm not wrong, in Sulawesi Island, also in Indonesia. And he focused at the beginning on the Día Tarsier, the Tarsus dentatus, in Central East Sulawesi, in Central East region in Sulawesi. And one of the studies or the main objectives was to study the effect of human activity in the habitat and the population of this species of Tarsius dentatus. He also worked on the study of biogeography of Southeast Asia and also focuses on the Wallacea region, and we have seen on Myron presentation. Stefan has studied also speciation mechanism and also the role of acoustic and olfactory signaling for mate recognition in small mammals, where the tarsiers are one of the best models to study. And furthermore, Stefan has participated also on the description of several tarsiers, as we have seen before also with Myron. So I think we are ready to enjoy the Stefan presentations, and let's enjoy. Thank you, Stefan. You can start.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Thank you for having me here. For letting me join this International Tarsier Day. Thanks for organizing. Thanks for the introduction. Right now, I hope you can hear me, and I hope that you can see all the slides smoothly. Oh, I hear that my sound is bad. Oh my goodness. All right. What should I do? I'll try to. Maybe I could choose another microphone. All right. I'll try another mic.
Okay, I think we have some problems with Stefan connection, so we're gonna try to solve it. So as we say before, you can during the talk you can start writing the questions also for the speakers, so you don't have to wait until they finish. The only thing is that once they finish, we will read these questions and we will ask to the speakers. And also we have if we have time at the end of the event, we will try to have all the speakers together, and maybe we can enjoy a bit more talking and sharing info about the tarsiers. Okay, so we're gonna switch. We're gonna go to another talk while we try to solve the problems with the connection with Stefan. And we are gonna listen now Dr. Nanda Grow, and she's a scholarly assistant professor at the Department of Anthropology at the Washington State University in the USA. She has studied the biogeography, biology, and ecology of the Montan pygmy tarsier, also known as Tarsius pumilus, in the Lore Lindu National Park in central Sulawesi, and that is one of the most beautiful national parks on the Sulawesi Islands. And one thing that is really special for this species is that the Tarsius pumilus is the only tarsier species exclusively montane, so that lives on the highlands, on the mountains. We cannot see this species on the lowland forests. Welcome, Nanda. Thank you for being here. Nanda has focused also on how species adapt to life on higher altitudes. That is really important nowadays, that the forest on the lowlands are diminishing, and the species shift their range to the higher elevations. And also, Nanda is continuous studying the tarsier, for example, their evolutionary history, and also the evolution of vocal frequencies in different species. So I'm going to stop now, and we are going to enjoy Nanda's presentation. So whenever you want, you can start. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy.
Can you hear me now? Is it good? Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you all for coming here to our talks on International Tarsier Day. I'm really excited to be here with you all, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me here today. And I am excited to share some of my research here with you today on a special species of tarsier in Sulawesi, Indonesia, Tarsius pumilus, commonly referred to as pygmy tarsiers or montane tarsiers. And what I'm going to be talking about would probably be better framed within the context of the broader information that we know about Sulawesian tarsiers that Stefan Merker will introduce. But we have the order switched a little bit here. So I'm just going to be focusing on this one particular species that lives exclusively in the mountains, and living in the mountains then gives some special considerations that we have to think about when we're considering the conservation requirements of this species compared to those in the lowlands. So for an outline of what I will be talking about, I'm first going to just give you some broad background on what I do as a primatologist to give you some context, and then go over some background on this particular species. And then I will present some of the results of my research in Sulawesi and what I have found thus far. And what we know about this species so far is that they're very difficult to locate, very difficult to observe. And I'll give you some of the preliminary information that we have on their population distribution and their communication patterns. And then I will end with some continuing research directions, some suggestions for what either I'm planning or what someone else might carry out to apply this research to conservation. So, some background where I'm coming from in terms of my research. I'm a primatologist, behavioral ecologist, as was mentioned earlier, and I'm broadly interested in the adaptation and evolution of primates, especially those that are nocturnal, and especially those that might mirror the activity patterns of the very earliest primates. So tarsiers are a great model for that. And I'm interested in especially how primates that might be considered more specialized in terms of their morphology or their behavior, that is, that they have adaptations that allow them to do very well in a more narrow environmental range, how these primates can respond to changing environments and help them survive in these increasingly degraded environments. So I will address some of what we might consider in terms of conserving wild populations of primates, especially the species Tarsius pumilis, in human-modified landscapes. So to kind of continue what Myron established, the ecology and the biodiversity in Indonesia is quite special, right? And it encompasses two distinctive biogeographic zones. And these zones are Wallacea and Sundaland, both of which have very high rates of endemism, which means those species aren't found elsewhere in the world. And tarsiers are, of course, included in this. So this endemism extends to primate species, of course, and Sulawesi is home to potentially the highest number of tarsier species out of all the islands that they are located on. And the tarsiers in Sulawesi, the eastern tarsiers, are separated allopatrically or parapatrically. So this means that there's little to no overlap in species ranges. And Tarsius pumilis, which I'm talking about today, occurs in central Sulawesi with the species ranges of overlapping or kind of in the same geographic area as two lowland species of tarsiers, Tarsius lariang and Diane's tarsiers, and montane tarsiers, Tarsius pumilis, only occurs in the mountains, while other species occur in the lowlands. So there is a gap between their ranges. And this is one reason why I think that altitude and elevation is so important in considering their unique traits, because there's no overlap with these lowland tarsiers. It means that montane tarsiers are isolated from lowland populations. And as I will show you, based on my research, montane tarsiers in the mountain in which I've conducted my research, Mount Rory Katimbu, has an altitudinal range above 2,000 meters above sea level, so they don't venture below that. And lowland tarsiers go up to around maybe 1,000 meters above sea level. Before I go into more detail on the characteristics of Tarsius pumilis, montane tarsiers, I want to review what we've historically known about this species, which is actually very little. So for a long time, this particular species was known from a handful of museum specimens that were captured during these exploratory faunal surveys over 100 years ago. And so people, researchers have tried to locate the species for a while, and because of the difficulty in locating a wild population of this species, they were thought to even be potentially extinct in the wild because no one could find them. But in 2000, in the year 2000, a third specimen was found in a rat trap, actually, during faunal surveys being conducted on Mount Rory Katimbu. And this is when researchers knew that they could kind of concentrate their efforts in locating the species in this area. And in 2000 was when we were able to locate the first known group of montane tarsiers. So that kind of confirmed the existence of the species in the wild. And you can imagine this was very exciting for primatologists and those who are interested in tarsier research. And what we know now is that the difficulty in locating this species probably has a lot to do with their different behavioral patterns, with their more cryptic behavior, and also with their small body size and low population density. So this can be a problem when we're trying to assess population threats, because we do lack the data, and it is difficult to acquire more of this data. So they are behaving quite differently from other tarsiers in Sulawesi. But perhaps, of course, the most striking feature of what are commonly referred to as pygmy tarsiers or montane tarsiers is their extremely small body size. And a question that is still being explored is whether they are truly pygmy species, whether they've undergone an evolutionary size reduction. So something like a formerly lowland population moving upwards in elevation and becoming locally adapted over time, or whether this is maybe an ancestral, a retention of ancestral small body size. So interesting questions to still explore here. And some of my research questions that are pertinent to the conservation of this species are, how do these tarsiers respond to their habitat differently compared to lowland tarsiers? Why do they look and behave the way that they do? And I've shown that the traits that we see are adaptive responses to resource limitations in higher elevations. But ultimately, I want to use my studies to try to do something beneficial for populations of these primates. So much of my research is kind of geared towards understanding how we can incorporate this knowledge into accurately assessing population threats and moving into conservation plans. And we do kind of tend to think of higher elevations as these relatively untouched areas compared to lower elevations, but of course, this is no longer the case necessarily. Okay, so some background on the study site where I conducted this ongoing research on Mount Roroikatimbu is a mountain located within Lorilindu National Park. And the forest within Lorilindu is a mixture of both secondary disturbed forests and more primary forest. And this national park was established by UNESCO as a World Biosphere Reserve in the 1970s. And this is a really awesome place to do research. It's, of course, beautiful. There's lots of flora and fauna and really cool biodiversity in this area. And it's this internationally recognized destination and protected area. It didn't officially become a national park until 1999, though. So this is relatively recently established. And one thing that's interesting about this park is that it does have some high topography and elevations higher than 1,500 meters above sea level comprise about 20% of the park. That translates to roughly 45,000 hectares. So it is a quite mountainous region, you can see, and very picturesque. And much of the higher elevations remain relatively less disturbed by human activity compared to the lower elevations, but not undisturbed. Another important consideration when thinking about conservation of primates in this area is that there are around 117 villages that surround Lorilindu National Park, and there are 62 villages that are within the boundaries of the national park. So this is a really important consideration for conservation initiatives in this region. There's a lot of human overlap and interaction with primate populations that's inevitable, and there's some complex dynamics there. So you can kind of envision what this field site on Mount Roroikatimbu looks like here. These photos are dated between 2012 and 2014, just to give you an idea of the remoteness. It is a relatively remote region. It's now inaccessible, largely inaccessible to vehicles, because this bridge featured here on this slide has since collapsed. But most of the accessibility is by foot or by motorbike on this old illegal logging road that was established in the 1970s going up the mountain. Now it's more like a footpath rather than a road. So some of the data that I'll be talking about were collected in this time frame, 2012 to 2014, where I sampled between 1,800 meters and 2,400 meters in elevation and constructing a combination of line transects and quadrats to kind of grid off the area and sample both tarsier populations and ecological variables like vegetation and insects at these 100-meter increments going up the mountains. And I did use mist nets to capture tarsiers, which are a commonly used method for capturing lowland tarsiers in Sulawesi. And once captured, then I was able to use a radio receiver, a glue-on radio receiver, to track the tarsiers and follow them to their sleeping sites and gather more data on their groups and social arrangements. So these data are based off of 6,500 hours of sampling and observation, and this yielded only 22 individuals that were sighted and 18 captured. So the capture rate is quite low. It does take quite a long time of just searching. And again, this probably is part of the reason why we haven't known so much about this species for so long. Now, I alluded to this result a little bit earlier, and one of the most interesting observations that I made right off the bat was that I didn't sample any tarsiers below 2,000 meters above sea level. So I didn't detect the presence of any tarsier species actually between 1,800 and 2,000 meters above sea level. So no characteristic signs of lowland tarsiers like scent marks or duet calls. No tarsiers located in mist nets during weeks and weeks of sampling. So what this indicates to me is that there is a complete geographic gap between lowland tarsiers and pygmy tarsiers, or allopatric separation. And this is kind of just a way for you to visualize this separation. If you visualize this triangle here as a mountain, or specifically as Mount Roycatimbu. So Tarsius pumilis occupies this range between 2,000 and 2,400 meters of sea level, and lowland tarsiers in this case here, Diane's tarsiers, go up to about 1,000 meters or so based off of other studies. So at least currently, we don't appear to have evidence for contact. Now, this is important because there's this wide altitudinal gap, which means that Tarsius pumilis is subjected to a range of selective pressures that lowland tarsiers don't experience. They're living in a different environment and they have different habitat requirements. And some of these different habitat requirements are shown here. Some of these conditions are, as you go up in elevation, there's a bunch of ecological changes that occur. So temperature, air pressure, tree density, the diversity of species that occur in the area, the height of the canopy, all of these variables are decreasing. They all decline. And overall biomass and productivity also declines. And this is important because tarsiers' main food resources, insects, are constrained at higher elevations. And meanwhile, at the same time, humidity increases, basal area of trees increase. So trees are also changing. They're getting wider and shorter and stockier as you go up in elevation. And I was able to document these shifts in forest structure on Mount Roycatimbu. to kind of visualize what this looks like. In Mount Rory-Katimbu, you can see that this is what highland mossy cloud forest looks like, the habitat that montane tarsiers live in. Everything's covered in kind of this thick, gooey layer of moss, and compare that to what lowland forest looks like. It's much denser, and there are different types of trees. So considering high elevations is broadly very important to primatology, because we know that nearly half of all primates that are classified as endangered utilize high altitude forest in some regard. And that would be any type of forest that's occurring above 1,000 meters above sea level in this instance. So many primates are being forced into these more marginal environments, whether that's through anthropogenic activity, or increasingly encroaching in primate habitat at lower elevations, or whether it's more indirect, the result of global environmental change. So these environmental changes that are occurring increasingly through the years may account for this high proportion of primates at higher altitudes. And higher altitudes make up about a quarter of the Earth. So mountainous environments make up about a quarter of the environments that we see in the Earth. So there's a disproportionate representation of primates in general at these elevations, and this is likely going to increase as the years goes on. So considering elevation as a significant variable of interest to conservation will help us to have a broader understanding of how primates might respond to life in these increasingly changing and resource poorer environments. So in terms of some of the results of my research, in terms of these population surveys that I conducted for population density of Tarsius pumilis, I estimate the population density of montane tarsiers to be about 90 individuals per 100 hectares. And that translates to about 25 groups per 100 hectares. And if you compare this population density to those of lowland species, both in Sulawesi and in other islands, like the Philippines, this is a pretty low estimate comparatively. So it makes sense, right, given that there is more limited land area at higher elevations, that there's going to be lower population sizes as well. Beyond a low density, another interesting thing about the sample is their distribution over the study area, where they do appear to be biasing their distribution closer to forest edges. And this is something that also has more recently been observed in Bornean tarsiers as well. So here we just have this topographic map of the study area on Mount Rory-Katimbu, and about a 1.2 square kilometer area is shown here, sampled by these 1 hectare square quadrats. And if we overlay the capture locations of individuals, you can see that these tarsiers were captured in only a small percentage of these squares indicated here, where there was sampling or misnets being laid out. So males and females indicated here by each symbol. Question marks just indicate unknown sex, and these yellow pentagons are sleeping trees. And you can see just by looking at this map that their locations do seem to be biased near the road, or the walking trail, I should say, that runs up the mountain. So they're spending time in areas where there's potentially more human activity. They're not shying away from it. And this probably has a lot to do with food availability. if we take a look at this bar chart here, you can see that both insect biomass and diversity declines with increasing altitude. So on the x-axis here, we have the altitude sampled at. On the y-axis, we have the amount of dry weight of insects that were collected, divided up by type of insect. And you can see that the total weight is the lowest at the highest elevation sampled here. So the size and the quantity of insects is decreasing at higher elevations. But if we compare this to the availability of insects at the forest edge compared to the forest interior across all elevations, you can see that insects are more abundant along edges. So the proportion of captured insects from the orders Lepidoptera and Orthoptera, moths and grasshoppers, they are known to be preferred by lowland tarsiers, and probably this is a significant food source for highland tarsiers as well. They were found to be significantly higher in proportions along edges compared to within the forest. So this is giving some information about where this particular species might be biasing their distribution. And it's not just where they are foraging or where they are hanging out and roaming around looking for food, but it's also where they're choosing to put their sleeping sites. So in terms of the sleeping trees that they chose, these are also located near the edges. And they also are seeming to prefer larger trees for sleeping sites. In particular, evergreen trees, including white oak, was identified as one of these sleeping trees. So beech and oak trees, larger trees, seem to be preferred as sleeping site choices for these tarsiers. And also of note is one sleeping tree was actually a dead tree. So this is an indication that even decayed and deceased trees are an important resource for tarsiers. And so in conducting future vegetation analyses and habitat suitability analyses for these tarsiers, not just live vegetation should be considered as well. So you can see these sleeping trees plotting above the regression lines here. Another interesting thing about montane tarsier distribution and social groups is the types of groups that they were forming, the number of individuals who shared large sleeping trees, such as this pictured here. Here we have the group size and composition for 6 groups of tarsier, pygmy tarsiers that were observed. And like lowland tarsiers, they do appear to be living in groups rather than sleeping solitarily at night. But a couple interesting features of these groups is that 2 of these groups contained multiple adult males, and one in particular contained 4 adult males and 1 female. So this is something that's a bit unusual in terms of the group composition. And we can speculate, we don't know necessarily, but one reason multiple males might be beneficial for montane tarsiers could be vigilance about predators. I have observed that the forest is more open, lets in more light, and has more visibility at higher elevations, could be potentially related to predation threat, but this is, as of yet, untested. And another unusual aspect of Tarsius pumilis behavior is their communication style. So this is probably a big part in the difficulty in observing this species. It's how cryptic and hidden away the species is. So unlike lowland tarsiers in Sulawesi, they don't produce the same characteristic scent marks to denote their range. And Tarsius pumilis also habitually communicates at high frequencies in contexts where lowland tarsiers use lower frequencies in situations like social contexts or in distress situations like alarm calling. So when I was originally first studying this species and I observed them opening their mouths like they were making vocalizations, but I could not hear them, this was a good indication that they were in fact making calls, but beyond the range of human hearing. So at very high frequencies, sometimes higher frequencies than the frequencies that many bats use to echolocate at. So this is a challenge to assessing conservation threats. They're very cryptic behavior. It makes it very difficult to locate them and to conduct a population census. And it's an interesting consideration in that they lack audible vocalizations. As of yet, I have not heard them making audible vocalizations, but it does appear that they may be making duet calls that are characteristic of lowland species in Sulawesi, a male and female pair making those calls as they leave their sleeping tree or when they're returning to their sleeping tree. It appears that they may be making similar type calls, but at a higher frequency. So there are a lot of unique considerations when we're thinking about the ecology and behavior of Tarsius pumilis. And I want to finish here talking a little bit about the threats to their populations. Their low density and the limited land area at mountaintops and their potential genetic isolation are all contributing factors to the threats that pygmy tarsiers face nowadays. And habitat loss is a big complicating factor here, in addition to these ecological factors that are potentially making conservation a complicated situation for them. So although montane tarsiers are relatively removed from the bulk of agricultural activities that are taking place in the lowlands of Sulawesi, it's only a matter of time before more activity, including agriculture, moves to higher ground, like it has in Java, for example. And the creation of roads up into montane habitat is a major threat, as that brings increased human activity and it creates that cut through the forest interior. It creates those new edges, which we know that at least this species in particular gravitates towards. So it comes with more interactions, potential interactions between humans and natural resources and the animals that live there. And I have noticed within the amount of time that I've done research in this region that the number of people who are moving up into higher elevations to do things like harvest resource, like harvest tree resins from certain trees. This is an economic commodity that can be sellable as fuel. This particular type of activity seems to have increased anecdotally through the years. So for continuing research projects for assessing the conservation needs of Tarsius pumilis, I would like to do a more complete population census in the future and survey some other mountains in the region, not just focusing on Mount Roycatimbu, to get a more complete picture of the distribution of tarsiers in the highlands of central Sulawesi. And this could be conducted in conjunction with habitat occupancy surveys and in conjunction with local communities. So a community-based conservation effort is especially appropriate in this area, given that so many communities are tied to the national park and people depend on resources in this park for their livelihood and also have a vested interest in both those resources and also conservation of those natural resources like primate populations. Currently, so Tarsius pumilis has been listed as one of the most endangered primates by the IUCN, but the status, the conservation status of Tarsius pumilis is something that we still need to gather more data on. It's still, we're a bit deficient on data in that regard, as we only really have information from this one population. And going forward into the future, it's going to be increasingly important to take a look at how they are using different types of forest and isolate which variables are important for their survival in the wild. And as is true of all primate species, it's also going to be important to assess the impacts of climate change and how this is potentially impacting higher elevation forest in addition to lowland forest that is oftentimes concentrated on. So large-scale climate events, as we know, and the natural disasters that they cause are becoming more and more frequent, and they are devastating for both human populations as well as primate populations. And recently, Indonesia has been ravaged by a series of tsunamis and earthquakes, also things like human-caused wildfires. So it's going to be important for primatologists to understand how rapid environmental change might influence human interactions with primates and their habitat, and does that maybe increase the frequency of human and primate conflicts in the region. And one way to assess this pretty rapidly and immediately would be to use satellite imagery to look at the impacts of these disaster events in forested habitat. Okay, so I would like to end here with a quote that I like to show in many talks. This quote by a researcher who wrote a book on the mammals of Borneo that kind of cast tarsiers in not the best of lights, but I think that all of us who do research on tarsiers and who have gotten to know how very well adapted these tarsiers can be across these Southeast Asian islands, I think our research is showing that they can be very well adapted even under harsh conditions. And I hope that the research that we're presenting here today can kind of prove this author wrong in terms of this quote. And that is all I have here for you today. So thank you for listening today. And I'd also like to acknowledge my funding sources and my research team.
Thank you very much, Nanda. It was really nice to listen to you. I have one question about the effect of the road on the population. I'm curious if, because it's known that in the populations that live close to the roads, usually the connectivity on the forest is less because of the space for the road. And we have seen that there are more, they used to be close to the road because there is more food available, more insects.
Yes.
But do you know, or have you seen like an effect of road kills? Have you seen many road kills on the road tarsiers, or do you think the connectivity is not affected? The trees are still doing the connection, like the bridge?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Where I have conducted most of my research, there is not road activity other than foot traffic. So that wouldn't be a problem. There is a disconnected canopy above the edge, though. So I have witnessed tarsiers going down onto the ground to cross over the edge, which is a problem for many arboreal primates that are located near these edges. So I imagine that this is only going to become an increasing problem in the future as there's more human activity moving onto into this area.
And okay, I have one more question. Before I'm gonna say please to the people, if you have questions, don't be shy. You can ask on the YouTube chat, so the speakers will answer to you. And the question that I have is also related with the conservation, and is do you think that the national park, since it has been established, is having an effect on the population? Do you think? Because I don't know if there is data before the national park was declared. So what do you think? Do you think that the population is getting better or worse?
Yeah, I definitely think that establishing the national park has had a positive impact on all the flora and fauna located within it, not just the tarsiers. But it's a more complicated situation than there being just like this protected area, in that there are people who live within the national park as well, and people who live within the boundaries of it. And many of these villages were established before the national park, right? So the people have a right to live there and to have access to these resources. And so it does create more of a complex situation. But I do think that having this protected area, having the rangers to enforce rules about resource harvesting and that type of thing definitely has an impact on tarsier populations. As far as for conservation of Tarsius pumilis, I don't know, but they've been relatively isolated for a while now because they're up in mountaintops. But going into the future, this is definitely some place. This is an area where the national park can step in and try to conserve these relatively pristine, not completely pristine, but relatively pristine areas compared to in the lowlands.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we have some questions from Elena Yaheya. It's about the tracking device. Can you explain a bit more about the tracking device, or the method that you use?
Sure. So the tracking device, I used a glue-on radio receiver. So it weighs less than 2% of the body weight of the tarsiers. I should say that these Tarsius pumilis, they are very small in that they weigh about 50 grams compared to, say, 150 grams for lowland tarsiers. So they're very tiny. They're about the size of, say, I would say a gerbil. Or a hamster, maybe. So they're very tiny. So you do have to consider the impact of the radio transmitter on their behavior. So I use just a glue-on, just regular super glue, glue it to their fur on their backs, and it falls off on its own after about 2 weeks. But within that time frame, I'm able to track them, get some data on their ranging patterns, and to follow them back to their sleeping tree, so can observe other group members in the same group. So so just using a radio receiving device to follow that transmitter.
And another question from Elena related with the collar. Do you think it was affecting the behavior of the animal or the welfare?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's always something that any type of observational primate research that deals with capture of primates has to consider, especially when we are putting radio tracking devices on them. And that's part of what played into my decision to not use a collar and to use a very small device that doesn't last very long. But the trade-off is that I believe that it's not going to impact their behavior so much. So originally I did try a collar for one of the first captured individuals, and even though it was within the realm of it was less than 2% of the body weight, it was, I felt like it was impacting their behavior a little bit. And so I switched. I recaptured the animal and removed the collar and switched the device.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you, Nanda, for your presentation and for your answers. And we are gonna try again with Stefan to see if it's working now. The camera. Let's see. Thank you very much for your questions, Elena. Can you hear Stefan?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can hear.
All right.
So,
not like a robot?
No, now the voice is good.
All right. So let's try it again.
Okay, we can see now the presentation. And so, okay, you can start. Hope now is working and we can enjoy your talk.
Okay, I'll try the second time. I'm sorry about the technical problems we have here. I hope this time it's going good. Okay, so thanks again for having me here, for introducing me. And before going into some of the comments where we're breaking up on it. Sound good. I just try to keep on talking. Can you hear me? Can you understand me? Anybody else, Myron? Okay, I'll just try to go on. Okay, I'll try to switch off the camera.
Okay. Stefan? Can you hear me, Stefan?
Okay, can you hear me? That is the computer
No,
mic.
now the audio is good.
You can the audio is good?
Yes, now yes,
right.
now is good.
All right. Okay, so let's try to do it this way. So you can see actually. I will start talking about the ecology and evolution of soil tarsiers. As Myron has pointed out, as Victor has pointed out, we did a lot of work over the last recent years, and by the end of today's talk, today's topic of this webinar of course, just on okay, my audio was very bad again. All right, I'll take off my Okay, can anybody hear me? All right, good. So I'll try again. I'm sorry about that. Okay, third attempt. So we let's move on. Actually, right now I'm sitting here in the basement of my home in Germany. But what I want to do is to take you by the hand and go with you to the forest of Sulawesi in the early morning at about 5:30, and actually I doubt that you will hear anything, but I'm trying to play insect noise in a second. All right, so it's 5:30 in the morning. We just went into the forest looking for tarsiers, enjoying the forest. And then the tarsier appears. So that's a female giant tarsier actually. The male will start in about 5 seconds. Oh, here we go. Here we see the guy, well, actually the girl that started first. And so this talk, in this talk, I will introduce tarsiers to you again. Okay, it's the third talk of the evening or morning or wherever you sit. But anyway, they're really worth doing that. So I will talk about tarsiers again, then I will very briefly focus on biogeography and evolution, because we did so much work on those topics over the last years. And then I will do what I was asked for today. I will talk about our ecological projects. So, but first of all, let me try to show you some pictures. So, as you know by now, tarsiers are very small, lightweight primates from an ancient evolutionary or independently evolved lineage from the middle of the primate tree, formerly classified with lemurs and lorises as prosimians, but as you can see here, prosimians are paraphyletic. So, as a phylogenetic evolutionist, at least I'm not using this term anymore. So tarsiers are, as you have heard, completely nocturnal, active from dusk to dawn. They are the only exclusively faunivorous primates on Earth, as Myron Shekelle has pointed out already. They live in Southeast Asia. The tarsiers on Sulawesi perform morning duet songs that serve territorial and social reasons. And you can see a sonogram here. And we know about 14 species by now, but as Myron has already mentioned, a couple of more are on the brink of being described as new species. So I have neither gone to the land of the orangutan nor to the land of the bird of paradise, which would be New Guinea, not shown here on this picture, but I went straight to Sulawesi in the middle of the Malay archipelago. And what Alfred Russel Wallace termed an anomalous island is home not only to the Babirusa, but also to some other very conspicuous examples of wildlife, to other colorful, enigmatic, and especially endemic fauna, of which you can see some conspicuous examples here. So among these are tarsiers. So you have seen a similar map a couple of minutes, actually, or an hour ago at Myron Shekelle's talk. I was asked to give an ecology and conservation related talk today, but nevertheless, I want to share some thoughts with you, some thoughts that popped up quite naturally after spending a long time on Sulawesi, in total about 3 years, doing the ecological work we've done and witnessing the stunning allopatric diversity of Sulawesi tarsiers. So one of these thoughts, of course, was about the origin of tarsier diversity. So how many species are there? How do they relate to each other? How do they interact? And to put it in Colin Groves' words, so where did they come from, and when, and what happened to them when they got there? So one of my former students and later colleague, Christine Driller, you've already seen her picture today, went to Sulawesi and sampled all over the island, sampled tarsiers all over the island, and she reconstructed a phylogenetic tree and dated the divergence events. And based on that, we put together a map of tarsier colonization of the island. And here we see that tarsiers colonized Sulawesi at least in 2 separate waves. So one probably started here in the southeast, went north, and then a second wave started here in the southwest and populated the center core of the island here, partly displacing lineage 1 tarsiers, which is pretty cool. So close to a tectonic suture, the Palu Koro Fault, we found a contact zone between Dians and the newly described Lariang tarsiers here. And and based on several genetic markers, we documented interaggressive hybridization between those 2 species. We found a hybrid zone between these forms, which actually was very small. So with this example, we provided robust evidence that the different acoustic forms on Sulawesi are indeed different species. And despite some little degree of hybridization, there was no fusion of the 2 species, but their identities remained were maintained instead. So my PhD student Yvonne Boris is currently looking more deeply into the genetics and also the acoustics of this hybrid zone. We also witness evolution at work, which I call speciation in statu nascendi. In 2010, we described Wallace's tarsier, Tarsius wallacei, with a disjunct range here in central Sulawesi, and which is a very, very curious distribution actually, because another species, Tarsius dentatus, is just in between. And a postdoc of mine, Laura Hagemann, will focus on the rationale of that distribution very soon. So that were just some glimpses into the other work, the evolutionary work that we've been doing over the past years. But again, I promised to talk about ecology and conservation of tarsiers. So we have to go back quite a number of years, actually more than 20 years. Victor has already introduced me by saying that I went to Sulawesi, well, the first time I went to Sulawesi was in 1998. And to do my master's thesis. And at that time, we weren't really sure where tarsiers were to be found on Sulawesi, except Tankoko Nature Reserve in the very north of Sulawesi, where the McKinnons, Carsten Niemitz, Alexander Nietzsche, and Sherry Gursky, and also Myron Shekelle did their work. And we knew about Conmemora, which was the type locality of Diane's Tarsier, Tarsus Diane, described in 1991. You already see here that Tarsus Diane is not valid anymore, but it turned out to be the junior synonym of Tarsus dentatus, which had been described much earlier in 1921. Sorry. Well, anyway, so I knew that the tarsiers were to be found in Conmemora, so I went there to study Diane's Tarsier, which is actually endemic to the central core of Sulawesi with quite unknown southern limits. We're not sure about this part here. In size, shape, and behavior, they're very similar to other Sulawesi lowland tarsiers, and also characterized by a very specific duet song, and the one you have heard at the beginning of this talk. So you see the dates. That's quite a long time ago. So I did my master's there, and I did my PhD work there a little later on the well-being of tarsiers in several habitats on Sulawesi. So my goals were, or my main goal was to assess and compare living conditions for tarsiers in different habitats. I was asking whether or which type of forest is most suitable, which anthropogenic influences do tarsiers tolerate, and last but not least, are they in imminent danger of extinction, and what can be done to prevent them from potentially going extinct. So naive as I was at that time, I thought that my results would be the basis of a scientific background for management plan. So I handed over my results to the authorities. Well, I'm still waiting for the response. So Conmemora, as I told you, is actually a village. No, it's a village, and it's a ranger station. It used to be a ranger station at that time, right at the edge of Lorelindo National Park, as Nanda Grow has talked about. And so I went there, set up some study plots. I rented a house right at the ranger station, which I named after the county in Germany that I'm from. And at that time, I got a very smart young Indonesian counterpart at that time, studying at the University of Indonesia, Indra Yustian, and I'm more than thrilled that almost exactly 20 years after we took these pictures, Indra Yustian will present his work on Western Tarsiers today, right after my talk. So how to assess well-being of an animal? Well, in the literature, there you can find some parameters to do so. And I tried to see, or I hypothesized on the parameters, or how tarsiers behaved in different habitats, and how I could read from my data whether those habitats were qualified as good or bad tarsier habitats. So population size, yeah, and it was also was in many publications mentioned as a very good habitat, or a very good parameter to assess animal well-being. So meaning that in good habitats, the carrying capacity is high, and thus population sizes are high as well. And so I thought, well, good tarsier habitat contains many tarsiers, so population densities are high, and in bad habitats they are low. Of course, I will show a number of arrows here, and there are many ifs around these arrows, many conditions that have to be met regarding the stability of populations and other things. But as a rule of thumb, I think those hypotheses are valid. So, and optimal foraging theory actually tells us that to maximize fitness, animals follow strategies that provide the most benefit for the lowest effort, meaning that home range size is also a good indicator of resource availability. And since larger home ranges have higher energetic costs, larger home ranges provoke higher energetic costs in tarsiers. And if resources are plentiful, animals range and defend only smaller areas, so just as much as they need to fulfill all their needs. And the same applies to path lengths, actually. Tarsiers, let's say, don't go jogging just for fun. They travel only as far as they have to. I already told you about carrying capacity of a habitat, so meaning that group sizes could be higher in good tarsier habitat and low in bad habitat. Health status, of course, might be an indicator of well-being of the animals. So I hypothesize that parasite loads might be low in good tarsier habitat and higher in worse habitat, probably due to a weakened immune system of the animals. But actually, this didn't really turn out well. So there were no differences between habitats here, and also hypothesized on body weights. I thought that well-fed tarsiers must be fatter, must be heavier in good habitats. So reproductive success already was thought to be higher in good habitats, and lower in bad habitats. This is a very general thought, of course, and we couldn't really answer this question because spending a long time there in the forest, yeah, we thought we found all adult individuals, but it is very hard to find infants or juveniles that do not vocalize. So I couldn't really make much of this last point, reproductive success. So anyway, I measured these data, or took these data in 4 habitats along a gradient of human disturbance. So what I mean with human disturbance, other or previous authors already summarized some parameters to use, or some characters which could be used to quantify disturbance in rainforests. So that's the number of stumps, that were cut by humans, the number of exotic trees like cocoa or coffee. That's rattan, shorter or longer than 3 meters. That's big trees, which are bigger than or with more than 50 centimeters diameter at breast height. That's the number of epiphytes below or less than 5 meters above ground, and the maximum height of the moss line. So based on these parameters, which are actually quantified, and I put together into an index, a disturbance index, I assessed the habitats, or the study plots that I studied, as being either pristine forest with no disturbance at all, or slightly disturbed. That plot was actually characterized by small-scale timber harvesting. Another plot was or showed medium disturbance. That was a moderately disturbed forest interspersed with agroforestry, plots of coffee or cocoa cultivations, but which also showed signs of selective logging and also rattan harvesting. And the heavily disturbed patch was actually a mixed species plantation outside of the old growth forest, but in the vicinity of forest. I will come back to it right at the very end of this talk, if there's still time left. So what did we do? We localized tarsiers first. So localizing Sulawesi tarsiers means going to the forest, listening to the calls, and over the course of several days, try to follow their calls to their sleeping sites. And whenever possible, lowland tarsiers use strangler-figs as sleeping sites. They use crevices and holes in such trees as hiding places to spend daylight hours, and lianas and adjacent trees then are frequently used as pathways to reach these sites. And when there are no strangler-figs present, as is often the case in secondary forests or on plantations, tarsiers use bamboo stands and dense shrubbery as shelter for the day. So as Nanda had done, we also mist-netted tarsiers, and we caught a total of 71 specimens, nearly twice per animal, also using those mist nets. We weighed all tarsiers, we measured them, examined them for parasites, for ectoparasites actually, and also for pregnancy. We then radio tagged tarsiers. Nanda has shown glue-on radio tags, which used in their study. Those lowland tarsiers weigh more. They weigh between 100 and 140 grams. So we could afford to use slightly heavier tags, and our tags actually weighed 3.9 grams, which is around 3.5% to 4% of their body weight, which is, according to all literature, pretty much okay in terms of altering their behavior or ranging patterns. So we had put the radio collars around the waist and not around the neck, because tarsiers barely have any neck, and because they need to turn the head nearly 180 degrees in each direction. That would be more or less hinder them during the normal behavior. So we put it around the waist. And then we radio tracked tarsiers over the course of about 2 weeks, so between 10 days and 2 weeks. We tracked 6 females and 6 males in primary forest, and additionally 6 females in each of the 3 disturbed habitat, which is a total of 30 tracked tarsiers. And we constructed home ranges or reconstructed home range sizes based on about 80 locations per animal. So in order to better characterize these habitats in terms of tarsier needs, I already told you that I tried to, oh, that was too fast. I'm sorry. I'm going back. So that I quantified tarsier disturbance with an index. We also did insect counts and measured the abundance of substrates, of small vertical and horizontal substrates that tarsiers used for locomoting, for traveling. So, all right, so now looking at body weight. First, here you can see differences between males and females, which are quite extensive, but no differences between females of different habitats. So there was no way of characterizing habitat this way. Now looking at population density, let's look at the habitat patch here first. What you can see here is first a trail system, our trail system, which is characterized by these thin white lines, and there is a gravel road there in the south, the stubble line, and the white or light gray patches are actually agroforestry patches of about half an hectare size with cocoa or coffee cultivations. And all these circles, so the darker gray and the light gray circles, are tarsier sleeping trees. So you can already see that they're spaced very, very evenly across the forest. So anyway, now how to measure population density? I couldn't really draw a circle or a rectangle or something around these trees because there was a smoother, gradual let's say there was a gradual transition between different types of habitat, so I couldn't really make out any form to put on that. So I tried to solve this problem in a way that I measured the distance between sleeping trees, between the sleeping sites of tarsiers, which were not always trees, but sometimes also bamboo stands or dense shrubs, and then recalculated tarsier density or population density based on a formula that I developed during my dissertation, and so came up with population densities in terms of group densities with this formula. So you can already see that the lowest distances between trees, so the highest densities, population densities, can be found in primary forest with no disturbance, and the lowest densities can be found in the mixed species plantation, which was heavily influenced by man. Unfortunately, one of these sites, and you will already have noticed that suddenly I showed 5 bars instead of 4. So one of these sites was logged almost immediately after we went there, so we had to skip this, and we couldn't do any tarsier tracking on that plot. So only 4 habitats were analyzed after that. So in those 4 remaining habitats, we looked at group sizes. So here you can see that the group sizes in primary and slightly disturbed forests are highest, around 5 animals on average per group, and in the other 2 plots, medium disturbed forest and heavily disturbed forest, groups are smaller. And putting those 2 graphs together, we came up with a total population density of individuals per square kilometer. And here you can see that the density in primary forest is by far the highest. And then on the heavily disturbed plantations, it's only 45 individuals per square kilometer. So looking at home ranges of males and females in primary forests. So males are shown by these shaded areas, and females with the black lines. So you can see that tarsiers are very territorial. So there's only very little overlap between groups, but high or much overlap between males and females that were actually mated pairs. So between habitats, you can see female home ranges here, or you can see 6 females in each habitat. And the black dots are actually most commonly used sleeping sites. And it turned out to be that male home ranges, remember that in primary forest we tracked 6 males and 6 females, so male home ranges were a little larger, but only just a tiny bit larger than the females in primary forest. But the primary forest home ranges of those females were larger than home ranges in slightly disturbed or medium disturbed forest. And then in heavily disturbed forest, the home ranges were largest. So, so this parameter actually favors the medium disturbance regimes, as described before. Looking at nightly path length, we see that tarsiers traveled only around or less than 1 female tarsiers traveled less than about 1,000 meters per night, and with increasing nightly distances in the other disturbed plantations. So how did we measure this? We actually tracked each of the 30 tarsiers for a whole night from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. And we took bearings every 15 minutes, and then I just added all the distances they traveled within those 15 minutes frames. So this way I came up with these numbers. So again, on heavily disturbed plantations, they need to travel farthest to find food or fulfill whatever needs they have. So looking at activity budgets, which can also be investigated using radio tracking, we see that tarsiers were most active just after dusk and just before dawn, traveling from or back to their sleeping sites, and the activity was a little less during midnight or around midnight. So in order to know better what causes certain forests to be better tarsier habitats than others, I correlated my habitat parameters with the population parameters that I took. And we see here results of Pearson correlation. So the degree of disturbance had a significant effect, a negative effect on population density. That was clearly significant here. The other correlations also look pretty good. They're nearly significant, not quite significant on the 5% level. And we see this non-linear relationship here that the degree of disturbance has with home range size. So one of the last slides I want to show concerns this mixed species plantations that I mentioned a couple of times. We did a habitat use analysis on that plantation, and here in this habitat we mapped vegetation structures in actual tarsier habitat, and then compared it with the percentage of time that we tracked tarsiers in these structures. So we looked at actual bearings, so as I said, around 80 per individual, and then tried to figure out how often we found the animals in which structures. And you can see here that that fallow or maize was, well, quite obviously not chosen by tarsiers, and we see that around 20% was available. Yeah, so their home ranges consisted of around 20% of this habitat or this vegetation structure here, and it was used much less, around 9% only. It doesn't mean that we found them 9% of all time in maize or on fallows, but this vegetation structure was also interspersed with small trees that they could use, but very few of them only. On the other hand, here you can see a very positive relationship between the offer and usage of shrubs. So they really elected shrubs as their favorite vegetation structure in this mixed species plantation, highlighting the importance of such structures in man-made habitat. So to draw at least some conclusions, we see that Tarsius dentatus thrives as well in slightly disturbed habitats as in primary forest. Plantations, as just shown, might still support tarsiers if forest remnants, meaning sleeping trees and locomotor supports, are present, and if they're close to source habitats, because as I showed to you, this is far from favorable to tarsiers. So they thrive much better in primary and secondary forest habitats. But such plantations are very very frequently found in Indonesia. So they really dominate the landscape, and I think it's good. It's good to know that tarsiers at least can use such structures as stepping stones or as corridors between favorable habitats. So this species, Dian's tarsier, Tarsius dentatus, is not in imminent danger of extinction because it is quite adaptable to human land use, to widespread human land use in Sulawesi, and it has a rather large range. So, but again, this is valid only for this species because of its wide range. It's the conservation status, as Myron Shekelle has pointed out, is much different for other tarsier species that have much smaller ranges. So we've seen that forest gardens in the forest, or some coffee and cocoa plantations in the forest, have positive effects on tarsiers because they open up the canopy. There's more sun, more undergrowth, more insects they can feed on, and logging generally has negative effects on tarsiers. They're easily scared away. Of course, it depends on the amount of logging. Plantations, as we've seen, might support tarsiers under certain conditions. Yes, well, of course, rice, corn, clove tea, coconut plantations do not support any tarsier. So I think I'm through. I want to thank a couple of institutions, helpers, and of course you for listening. And sorry about the technical problems again.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. It was really interesting and really nice, your presentation. Thanks a lot. I have a question, and it's more general and focused on Tarsius dentatus. But do you think that depending on the season, if it's rainy or dry, the activity could be different, like vary? And in case it is different depending on the season, do you think that climate change may have an effect on the ecology or the behavior ecology?
Good question. Well, in general, climate has an effect on tarsier ranging patterns. So we've controlled for differences between the seasons. So there is a rainy season, there is a dry season in central Sulawesi, which, on the other hand, is not quite as pronounced as, let's say, in Tangkoka in northern Sulawesi. So the differences between the seasons are much bigger. In central Sulawesi, in Kamarora, it's also raining almost every day, even during the dry season. So the food supply is much more stable. So there is not much reason for tarsiers to alter their habitat use. In terms of climate change, in general, I doubt that this will play a big role in the near future, because those tarsiers inhabit areas up to, well, Nanda said around 1,000 meters. We found them up until 1,200 meters elevation. So starting from sea level to more than 1,000 meters elevation. So they're very adaptable to different types of forests. So I think that the threat by humans is much bigger than posed by climate change.
Okay, so you just referred to the threat from humans, and we missed a question before that I think you can also answer. It's from Walasiana Tour. And do you think, do you know if the COVID or the SARS-CoV-2 is affecting the genera, the tarsier?
I don't know. Really, I don't know. We know that that several mammals transmit this disease, like bats, for instance. But and certainly tarsiers could transmit it as well. But whether whether they might get sick from SARS, I can't tell really. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. So if we don't have any question more, we will go to the next one. Thank you very much, Stefan. It was
You're
really
welcome.
nice and really interesting. And okay, to continue, we're going to continue with the last talk for the night in Europe. Is Dr. Indra Yustian. He's working in the biology department of the University of Sriwijaya in Indonesia. Thank you very much for being here, Indra.
Yeah, hello. Thank you.
Yeah, we can listen now, yeah. Thank you very much for being here. So, as we have seen on Stefan's presentation, Indra also started studying really long time ago, the Tarsiers. And for example, Indra has focused his PhD on the population density and conservation status of Philippine Tarsiers, that is Cephalopagus bancanus saltator, if I'm not wrong, on the Philippine Island. And he has also studied how land use and human activity affect the horsefield tarsier, that is the Cephalopagus bancanus. Yeah. And nowadays, Indra is still studying and researching about the conservation and threats of different Indonesian species. So you can start whenever you want. Thank you very much. I hope we can enjoy your presentation. And whenever you want. Thank you, Indra.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Thank you also to the Association Rheumatologica Española for organizing this event. Is this my presentation is in presentation mode or still in the Windows mode? I have made it in presentation on my computer here. It looks like in YouTube still in the Windows mode, but it's okay. Maybe it's just a technical problem. Thanks again for Victor. Thanks also Myron to inviting me to this event, and thanks Stefan Merker. Actually, Stefan is the one who bring me to the Tarsier world. It's truly a wonderful thing that we can all meet today, this event, celebrating an International Tarsier Day, and please allow me to share about Western Tarsier, Cephalopagus bancanus, especially in Bangka and Belitung Island. As Victor mentioned, I have finished my works in Belitung Island about the Cephalopagus bancanus saltator, but now in this talk I will also talk about a little bit Cephalopagus bancanus in Bangka. So is it I should stop sharing first and then share again? In my computer this is already moved to the next slides, but in the YouTube channel maybe it's still in the first slide. Okay, I will continue. As mentioned by Myron in the first talk, there are only one species of Cephalopagus, which is Cephalopagus bancanus, and there are 4 subspecies which is distributed in different part of the Sundaland. Cephalopagus bancanus borneanus in Borneo, Cephalopagus bancanus natunensis in South Natuna Island, Cephalopagus bancanus saltator in Belitung Island, and Cephalopagus bancanus in Bangka Island and southern part of Sumatra. After this talk, maybe we will show.
Indra?
Yep.
Sorry, that the presentation is not working. It's still on the first, like the same slide since the beginning, the first one in the YouTube. Maybe we can stop sharing the screen and then come back again.
Okay. I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Are you? Could you share it again, Indra?
Okay. Okay, this is the second slide.
Yes. No, yes. Do you want to try if it goes back and forwards?
It's not working.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Now yes, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
It works. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. I will continue. Yeah, Danau Girang Field Center and Scubazoo will present us a video at the end of event. This sketches of Western Tarsier by Rules et al. 2014 maybe can give us a description about the 4 subspecies. Briefly, we can see the different in pure color and part of the face here. Bangcanus borneanus, it's slightly reddish in the nose and lips, and Bangcanus saltator has more grayish in the pure. So, my first interaction with Western Tarsiers, of course, in Belitung Island, started at 2004, 2005. After I accompanied Stefan in 2001, if I'm not wrong, in Camarora, and then I followed Stefan to Göttingen University and start my interaction with the Western Tarsiers. I found almost nothing about the subspecies at the beginning, only this information provided about the Cephalopharcus bangcanus or Tarsius bangcanus, provided by the amazing field work by the father of Tarsier field biology, Professor Karsten Nimitz, and then the old information from Fogden, Crompton, and Andau, and all of them has worked on Tarsier in Borneo, in Sabah or in Sarawak. And then, co-supervised by Stefan, I finished my study on Belitung Tarsiers on 2007, and in 2006, the Ruford Small grant funded part of the study, while also supporting and starting the conservation campaign of the Tarsiers in Belitung Island. We will see in the next slides later about the project in Belitung Island. And in 2007, 2008, Myron analyzed and changed the IUCN status of the species from low risk to vulnerable. So this is the project funded partly by the Ruford Small grant. A bit of information about what we have done in 2005 and 2006. We were successfully confirmed that population sustainability can continue as long as there are forests. As we can see here, Tarsier mother with her infant, which is still in, the mother still care the infant. We also confirm that the population density is higher in secondary forests compared to primary forests. And last but not least, Tarsiers did not enter the oil palm plantation, as Stefan also mentioned in his conclusion in Camarora. Tarsier doesn't fit with the plantation. Also, here in Belitung, Tarsier doesn't enter the oil palm plantation. And we do also the conservation campaign of the species also in Belitung. In these slides, we can see the home range sizes of Belitung Tarsiers in secondary forest with logging and surrounded by oil palm plantation. We can see here that no point at all Tarsiers entered the palm oil plantation, which is almost completely surrounded the remnant forest here. So, one female could be visiting by more than one male. Average home range for male is 4.3 hectare and female is slightly smaller, 3.04 hectare. This is average home range. And it giving the population density of Cephalophacus bancanus in Belitung Island is about 46 individual per square kilometer compared to Western Tarsiers in Borneo. Information from Nimitz, below 80 or below 18 by Saputra, which is studied in 2017. So it is continue our work in Belitung Island with the ex-situ conservation pilot project near their natural habitat in 2010-2011. This is also funded by the Fort Small Grant, my second RSG, and the outcome is about enclosure design and enrichment, which is maybe a little bit inspired the Tarsier Research Shelter and Sanctuary in Batu Mentas by Budi Setiawan, which we will be see in the end of this presentation. So at the same time, conservation campaign of the species also continued. About or around 2011, the Tarsier as fauna identity of the province of Belitung, Bangka Belitung Islands is enacted. So our field studies of Western Tarsiers in Bangka and Belitung continues by Randi Saputra in 2015, if I'm not wrong, 2016 and 2017, and then which studied the distribution and population of Cephalophacus bancanus in Bangka Island. And also there are another study in Belitung Island about the habitat preferential by the IPB students, University of IPB, Bogor. And we also have ongoing studies about the vocalization of Western Tarsier, which we have done in 2020, but still waiting for the publish in this year, I hope. We have 7 vocalization types with different function of spectrogram patterns, which all of them can be heard within human hearing actually, but some of it has the peak frequencies at the ultrasonic level. We recorded the vocalization in temporary enclosure, which we have built in there in near the place where we caught them. So allow me to explain a little bit about the Batu Mentas, a place in Gunung Tajam at Belitung Island, which is by Budi Setiawan. Started in 2009-2010 with the development of research shelter in Gunung Tajam, and then continue with the development of Tarsier sanctuary in Batu Mentas. The size is about 20 by 20 meters, and launched in 2011 by the vice head of the district and by the vice chief of police department in Belitung Island. This is supported by the national coordinator of GAF, Small Grant Program for Indonesia. So in Batu Mentas, Budi running a program about tarsiers to increase the awareness, not only for the local, but also to the students. Here we can see the pictures of his program, which is involve many peoples, and maybe this is a little bit if so many people, I would say maybe will give a disturbing effect to the tarsiers in the sanctuary, but it is good to increase the awareness of the young generation to have tarsiers in their visionary. So maybe that's all that I can share, because we already has 2 hours sitting here, and maybe all of you already get tired. Terima kasih, dankeschön, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Indra. Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak. And we are. I have one question for you, Indra.
Yep.
And it's about the last thing that we saw, the campaign to raise awareness on the people, to explain the people the threat and the status of the species. But how do you think that the local people, Indonesian people, see the tarsier? Do you think they see like an animal to protect, a species to protect, or do they have, because of local culture or stories, a different side on the tarsiers? What do you think?
Yeah, at the beginning, tarsiers, local people assume that tarsiers is a pest or giving a bad luck. So if they go to the forest and meet tarsiers, they will say bad luck, so they shoot the tarsiers. But now, maybe I don't know, in Bangka but in Belitung Island there are no assumptions like that anymore. Budi can confirm it, and especially in Gunung Tajam. So also my guide in my study place in Belitung Island, he was a hunter previously, and after about a year accompany me study these animals, he became what we call ambassador ambassador for the awareness of this tarsiers conservation. So yeah, it's amazing that the local people assumptions, it's changing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Indra, for your answer and
You're
everything
welcome.
you explained to us during your talk. Okay, so to finish the International Tarsier Day, we want to share a video that Danau Girang Field Center and Scubazoo wanted to share with us. And Danau Girang Field Center is based in Sabah, in Malaysia, in the Lower Kinabalu Wildlife Sanctuary, and is a collaborative research and training facility managed by the Sabah Wildlife Department and the Cardiff University. And the main aim of the project is to help mitigate the loss of biodiversity by understanding the effects of habitat fragmentation while encouraging in situ conservation and also engaging with NGOs, stakeholders, and policymakers. So they teamed with Scubazoo, that Scubazoo is a film and photography company that produce videos to increase the awareness to wildlife problems. And for example, they have made videos about illegal hunting, illegal pet trade, and also the Borneo Jungle Diaries. Then in this Borneo Jungle Diaries that we are going to watch now, one chapter, they show like the research that they do, and also they try to show how this research is helping or contributing to the conservation of the wildlife and the species. So we are going to watch the video that we will see Dr. Danica Stark and Alexander showing us one day doing research in the jungle of Borneo and studying the tarsiers.
Dapat, Lud. Got one. Let's go. Tonight we're looking for an animal that is in the running for the oddest creature on the planet. That's my kind of animal. This is a Western Tarsier. You might not know it, but all Tarsier species are in fact primates and are the only true carnivore in the entire primate family. This nocturnal animal is confined only to islands in Southeast Asia. Its huge eyes and unique body shape is all adapted in order for it to live and hunt in the jungle trees at night. There really is nothing else quite like it. I'm out tonight with Danica, who has been in these jungles for almost 8 years. We're capturing a tarsier to try and understand more about them.
My name is Danica, and I'm primatologist here at Danau Girang. I've been in Sabah for almost 8 years now. During that time, I've been overseeing all the primate projects here. At the moment, I'm focusing my work on tarsiers, looking at how tarsiers are using the habitat in this area and looking at their overlapping home ranges. We're studying tarsiers here because very little is known about this subspecies of tarsier. It's found only on the island of Borneo, And our study at DG is going to give us that basic information so that we can actually monitor the population over the years. It'll give us some sort of an idea of how things are changing. What I think people should know about tarsiers is that they can't survive in captivity. They need to be in the wild. They're only eating things that are alive. So they don't eat any plant material. It's a very unique characteristic about this primate. We hope to understand what tarsiers require in order to succeed in this type of environment. And we want to understand its basic behavior, its home ranging patterns, so that we know how habitat fragmentation, deforestation is impacting its movements.
All right, Danica, so what are we going to do tonight?
We are going to go into the forest and we're going to try to catch a tarsier, a male tarsier who we know is living in this area.
Awesome. Why are we doing that?
Well, we have another female who's already collared here, so we want to catch this male, put a collar on him, then we can see where he's going in relation to where the female's going and see how they're doing in this kind of forest.
Tagging and tracking technology is becoming so advanced and efficient that across the world, scientists are using this method to understand more about animals. Collaring animals is a vital tool to understand how animals live and how they use their habitat, and in the case of Danau Girang Field Center, to learn if the fragmented forest is affecting their movement or not. All of this information is invaluable in the fight to save Sabah's forests and wildlife. Danica, how do you usually look for tarsiers?
All right, so we're gonna go searching, basically looking for the body only. Tarsiers are lacking layer on their eye that makes the eye shine like a Soloris has. Yeah. So we normally don't see the eye shine. So we're gonna look at about 1 meter to 2 meters high in the trees and try to look for a little brown body that's about this big that's just clinging on.
Let's go do it.
All right.
Joining Danica tonight are research assistants, Coco, Lee, and Alud. All are from this part of Sabah and having worked at the Danau Girang Field Center for many years. Their eyes are amazingly adjusted to this jungle and can find almost anything, night or day. And sure enough, they soon spotted something hidden amongst the trees.
Dapat, Lut? Ah, got one. Let's go. Ah, yeah. Thank you. Got one.
So can you show me what we're going to do now?
Okay, so we've set up a tarp just here. We're going to get everything out, lay it out on the tarp. If it's a new individual that we've never caught before, we'll do some body measurements.
Okay.
And then we'll put a collar on him. Hopefully we'll do it as fast as possible so we can release him quite soon.
Why have we changed our lights red?
The white lights actually can be quite painful on the eyes. So we're turning to red so it's a little bit softer and they don't seem to notice the red lights so much. So here we go. Weight is 210 grams.
Is that big for a tarsier?
No, that's about average adult. Okay, so we're going to take it out of the bag. Then we'll put the collar on because the collar is the most important thing. It's a boy!
Oh!
It's his boy parts. So they have very powerful legs. They can jump up to about 5 meters. We also need to be careful because a tarsier can move its head 180 degrees.
What?
Both directions because they cannot move their eyes.
Their eyes are just huge.
Yeah, so their eyes are about the same size, if not bigger, than their brain.
It has really long fingers.
Yeah, and it's got like a rat-like tail, and this tuft at the end of its tail is what's unique to the Borneo species. He's got fingernails like other primates. He's a primate. And his toes also have 2 claws on them.
Here's an interesting fact about Borneo. One tribal group, the Dusun, have a great name for tarsiers. They call it rukut rukut, which means bit by bit, because it looks like it's been put together with lots of different animal parts. The eyes of an owl, the ears of a bat, the legs of a frog, and tail of a rat. This odd match of body parts is what makes this animal so cool.
Alex, do you mind writing actually? That'd be really helpful. Okay. So head length in here, if you could write 2.97. Head breadth is 2.50.
With the coloring done and all other samples and measurements taken, the Tarsier is now ready to be released. The little male doesn't move right away and gives us all one last look before leaping back into the darkness of the rainforest. Providing valuable data that will help Danica understand more about how he uses the habitat and how he interacts with the female in the area. This information will be used to help protect their population in the future.
So Danica, how do you feel now that we've released that tarsier out into the wild again?
I'm feeling really great about it. It's really nice to be able to have a male and a female in the same range because we haven't had that too often yet. So we're really going to find out a lot of new information from it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's really nice to see him jumping off and doing what he does best.
Yeah.
Jumping quite far in one go.
I mean, it was exciting. That was my first time seeing tarsier, and seeing it jump off like that, that's just wow.
Yeah.
It's an amazing experience. I love that.
Great, I'm glad.
With another successful mission completed and valuable data coming in, I'm excited to find out what is next up for me and the scientists here in this jungle paradise.
Okay, I hope everyone enjoyed the video. It was really, really nice to see it. And before we finish, we have some minutes. We have some minutes to share all together.
Who pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Sorry. So, if we have, sorry. If we have, I gotta stop. If we have any question more to the speakers, or the speakers want to share anything together, we have still some minutes to share.
I'd like to say, I think what Nanda said too, that we cite Stefan and Indra's work so much because it is probably the best work on showing tarsier densities in different habitats. But Stefan, I think I missed that one when you presented it. I bet you gave it at Beijing or something, perhaps, and I missed it. Did you go to Beijing?
Yes, I went to Beijing. Yeah, I presented it there. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
It's okay.
All right, so this is working now. Yeah, which actually that was a mix-up, a mix of several presentations, and when I dusted it off a little, because you know that was 20 years ago that I had first presented those slides. Yeah, I presented that at Beijing, right? Because afterwards I started doing the evolutionary work, focusing more on population genetics and phylogenetic work. Yeah.
Yeah. great work to finally see it. I'm very pleased. It's been with everybody. Indra, to see you present your work, and Nanda, I hadn't seen your presentations either, so this has just been great for me. A lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but guys, sorry for my if my English is not so, it's not good enough. So,
Come on, Indra.
yeah.
Fine.
Really.
Thank you very much. Indra, we have a question for you. I don't know if we have time to answer.
Sure.
YouTube. It's we can see now on the screen is about the enclosures designed to the situ conservation for the tarsiers. If you can give a bit more info about how the design of the enclosure, we have more. We have more. It's like we can see now. Is there an importance about the distance between the enclosures, like the enclosure that went next to the other, or is wondering also if the territorially of the wild tarsier is if you have an estimation on how close to build the enclosures, or you have any info about this?
Yeah. Actually, we still need to study it furthermore. What we have done in Belitung Island, we built close enclosures, 2 enclosures which is maybe only 5 meters apart. And also in Bangka, when we recorded the vocalization, it's only 5 meters apart because we want to study is there any interaction if we separate 2 males, one with females in one enclosure, and one is male alone in one enclosure. So it will be interesting if we can study the distance of the enclosures, maybe.
Okay. So we have. Might this be the same or different tolerable proximity for the same species or for different species? Might say that in Libby we have you have worked with multiple enclosures, no, and it worked.
Yeah, I don't know. I have never seen the enclosures at Libby actually. Maybe Stefan and Myron.
Yeah, those were mine. So we had there was Cephalopacus, and then there were a few different species of Tarsius. But what do you, Stefan? You have a comment?
Yeah, my answer would have been we don't know, because yes, you had this enclosure at Lipi, and I've seen it, and they were very close together. But you also said that the success rate in raising young was extremely low. So we're not sure whether it has something to do with stress, with being stressed by other tarsiers, by other tarsier groups, other tarsier species that vocalize, socialize nearby. So that's actually a very good point that we should think about whether it's possible or how it's possible to establish a system of enclosures a bit apart from each other. So whatever, maybe 50 or 100 meters apart from each other. I know that might not be feasible in most instances, but maybe it is in others, because as you've seen in Sulawesi tarsiers, home range sizes are about 1 hectare, 1.5 hectares, and home range in this case is equal to territory. So that's the area they defend. This thought is new to me. I never thought about it. That this might be one reason. So the social stress might be a reason why the success rate of raising tarsiers in enclosures was so low. But Myron, you also said that this rate increased dramatically over the last years. Can you maybe relate a little bit more on that? What was changed?
Yeah, so what happened was with the first infant, when it was born, they started the project that was the artificial lake about 1 month after the tarsier was born. And this started right across the street. This had heavy bulldozers. And the infant, a 1-month-old infant, then appeared to have been attacked by the male and killed. Then the tarsiers were moved to a temporary facility that was not very good. It was inside a guest house, actually, that wasn't being used. And it had a tile floor, such as very common in much of Indonesia. And when the tarsier was born, within 2 days, it had fallen onto the tile floor and it had a cracked skull. Okay, so we moved it away from, the stress appeared to be from humans. And then the next thing that we did was, before the tarsiers were born, we put down a fairly thick layer of brown dead leaves. And that tarsier lived for, I think, about 6 months or a year. And then what happened was, it was found missing a leg, and it was believed to have been attacked from a predator outside of the cage that got a hold of its leg because it could hang on to the fence, and a predator could, in theory, grab it. So then we added a double net, so that there were 2 separate fences. And that tarsier then lived on to adulthood, but I left the project then. So what we did, we made incremental improvements. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn, but I didn't have the feeling. Yes, it's possible. I didn't have that feeling. And also, I've seen the commercial facilities, and they don't do much to keep the tarsiers separated. So ideally, sure, wonderful, keep them apart by 100 meters, but I don't know that that's if you're looking for the minimum specifications, my hunch is it's not necessary. More is about keeping the tarsiers low from stress from other people, keeping the floor soft, and then keeping a double set of fencing to keep any predators, because they love to use the fencing for a substrate. You look unimpressed, Stefan.
Yeah, I'd rather maintain the natural habitat.
Yeah. Sure, but wouldn't you like to have some XC2 options? Yes or no?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We need some. Yeah.
So back then, what the point was, we knew that we needed a few specimens for type specimens. And rather than capture and sacrifice, we spent a lot of time and effort to get a permit from the Indonesian government to do capture and hold. And then we used those as living type specimens, and then they were also available for student research and education and a variety of other things. And I was involved in that for about 3 or 4 years, and then I moved on to Singapore and passed on to other hands.
So maybe
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Myron.
I do need to go in just about 1 minute.
Okay, we are gonna finish. I just want to say, maybe it's an interesting thing that we need to, science need to do research on this question that we were talking also, because maybe it could help to the develop of rescue centers and sanctuaries for these species that we have seen that there are non-specific, and maybe it will help also for the conservation.
I agree with that, and I think that rescue centers, one of the great values is that we could benefit from XC2 options, and rescue centers by their very nature are talking about, although it's not the most human-friendly word, but low-value individuals.
Yeah.
They have low conservation value at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So thank you very much, all of you, for sharing your knowledge and all the info with all of us. I hope you enjoy also the people that has been following us on the YouTube, and now it's gonna be here in the channel of the YouTube of the Asociación Primatológica Española, so everyone can enjoy it. And I think it has been a really nice talks, and And thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for contributing.
See you.